So, Nicole, good morning.
Morning.
We thought we might do a dialogue around self-inquiry.
Yeah.
Okay, like it's one of various terms that we've used to describe a practice we do ourselves and work we do, thrown in with a lot of other slightly strange sounding terms like transpersonal or non-duality, or the Indian equivalent of these words gets even worse. But
Yeah.
self-inquiry is one we both probably use quite a bit, and you used it quite a bit in your book.
Mm.
So yeah, we thought we might have a little chat about um, what that means, and hopefully we mean the same thing by it. Otherwise, like we've been talking for the past 2 years about different things, and that'll be curtains for us. Then we'll have to go our separate ways. But so, and more than that, Nicole, you describe it as something you're personally interested in, but also something that was essential to your recovery from body dysmorphia, and yeah, a great interest of mine, and also something that when I went through a depressive period, it's the thing that really brought me out of that. So, what are you referring to in the term self-inquiry?
Um, well, first of all, I think it's totally fine if we end up having different conceptualizations of it, because I think
Okay, good.
from what I've read and from what I've experienced, it seems that it is taken up and described and practiced in different ways with different people. I think that's a really beautiful aspect of all of these practices, that they kind of, we take them up as best fits our circumstance and our conditioning and all the rest of it. So for me, self-inquiry, for me, it was very much a practice of a returning to the sense of who I am beyond the personal. So I guess if we take it back to that kind of transpersonal word, which is another one of the weird words, I think there's this idea with transpersonal that it's, well, if we break it up, so trans, beyond, and personal, personal, so beyond the personal. And I think implicit in that, there's a danger of it being assumed that therefore we have to go above and beyond the personal, therefore we leave the personal and we go to this other realm, and therefore it sounds all very spiritual and maybe unreachable as well. But I think trans also means across. So it's this idea that we are both the personal, the person, the thoughts, the body, the sensations, the perceptions, the experiences, but we're also something else that's beyond that. But there's a both and. So for me, the self-inquiry, I was very much that I'm my body, and my identity was very much pinned onto my appearance, onto my thoughts. Very much embedded in those things. And the practice of self-inquiry was then taking it back to, well, who is this I? Who am I? Who says my body, my thoughts, that has these experiences? And what I personally found is when I could observe my thoughts, and I found my thoughts to be an object. So I could turn my attention towards my thoughts, and I could observe my body. So I could turn my attention to this object that is my body. I could find it. Similarly with my senses, similarly with the things I could perceive, they're sort of all objects in the world. But then when I try to find this I, who am I, and try to turn around and look at that one, I couldn't find it. And in that moment of turning around and really, really being with that sense of I, there was a stillness, because there was an absence of an object. And it felt similarly to how I felt spontaneously many times in my life, maybe in response to nature or music, or just those moments when we're absorbed in something and time disappears and we seem to disappear, and we kind of lose touch with this kind of personal experience of who we are. Yeah. And for me, it wasn't so much a practice of like sitting for hours a day asking, who am I? Who am I? I did do that a bit. But for me, it was more kind of throughout my day, taking this attention back to a sense of I, and finding that I couldn't grasp it.
Okay. I'm curious to know when these thoughts started arising in you, or when you became aware over there being a mystery to the sense of I within, right? Because I think, like, as a culture, we've inquired into a great many things, okay, from like the way balls roll down inclined planes, to what makes volcanoes go off, to going into outer space, to like the subatomic realm. But the nature of who is it that's doing the inquiries, the nature of the self, is less explored, right? In the West, for the past few hundred years, it's more explored in Eastern culture, and maybe like back 2,000 years ago in Western culture. And this kind of esoteric stuff got lost a bit. I think my dog is wanting to get in on the conversation, so excuse her, everyone. And I can see in my own life, like, a certain point when I became aware that there's not a solid self back here that's looking out into the world. And then strange that I missed that for so many years. But what was your experience of, like, when did these thoughts of, I'll say mine in a moment, but what kicked that off for you?
I guess the first word that comes to my mind is suffering. And I guess underneath that is resistance, a lot of resistance to the way things were in my life. You mentioned before that I did struggle with, I had a diagnosis of anorexia, I had a diagnosis of body dysmorphic disorder. And I think those behaviours that focus on my appearance, that self-starvation, was a response to just really resisting the sense in me that I was unlovable, a monster even, and that just being abhorrent, of course, that sense to me. And that came out of my history, and there's all sorts that could be gone into there in terms of transgenerational stuff and relational stuff. So I really struggled with this for years and years. I thought, I'm a monster, I'm an awful person, there's nothing good in me. Maybe if I just make my body look a bit more acceptable, people might love me. That's something I'll try. I will also try lots of other things to make myself lovable, but intrinsically I feel unlovable. And kind of feeling like that for years and years and years, but never questioning, never questioning whether that was true or not, because it just was true, because that's how I felt. B, never imagining that might not be attributable to me, that there might be, other people, other circumstances, conditioning, maybe even genetics, tiny bit maybe, kind of coming together in this kind of boiling pot of the thing that emerged, or the behaviours that emerged, and the feelings that emerged. But never questioning any of that, and never questioning, who is this one that's a monster? Who is this one that's abhorrent? Who is this one that's unlovable? And I really got to, I guess, breaking point is the common phraseology for such an experience, where I just thought, I literally can't go on like this. I can't bear it. I cannot bear it. And in that, there was only one option left, because I tried all the other options. I tried resisting, I tried running, I tried fixing, I tried pretending, and I'd really tried them for years. And I got to this kind of breaking point, and I thought, gosh, there's only one place left, and that's to do the opposite to all of those things. That's to totally embrace my experience fully, to totally let go of the resistance, to totally surrender to this sense of self-hatred and abhorrence within me, and to just hug the monster, or however, I don't know how to put it. It all sounds very trite when I try to put it into words, but it really was a moment of, this is the end, and I'll either die or something will rise up. There was, it had to be one of those things because it was so fundamental and existential, I guess. And I guess what happened, Richard, or my experience was when that resistance dropped, and like not resistance in order to fix. So I tried that too. So like, oh, I'll stop resisting and then maybe I'll be all right. Not that. It's like total dropping of resistance, even if it means I'm going to go mad here, or indeed explode into 1,000 tiny pieces, which is how it felt. True letting go of resistance. Then the one who was doing all that resisting and fighting and starving and checking the skin and, I don't know, seemed to be very thin and ephemeral. And then I gradually kind of had an experience of, gosh, I can't find that one who's doing all this suffering and starving. And that really made me go back to explore where that one was. And that kind of led me on a path to doing a bit of reading around the subject and discovering that this thing had a term called self-inquiry, and that others maybe called it other things. I was like, that's kind of what I'm doing, but explained so much better than I could have conceptualized.
Okay, so it wasn't that you started reading Eastern philosophy and thought, oh, the nature of the self is shaky and I should investigate that. You were having these experiences prior to really understanding the context of them.
Yeah, and then the words would come, like people, even I remember you mentioning the word non-duality to me, and I thought, never heard of that before, it sounds interesting. And then Googling it and thinking, that matches. I can see why Richard would use that word in the context of some of the things I speak about and write about. But equally, I was a cradle Catholic, and I was always very interested in spirituality and started meditating from a young age. And reading books, mostly Catholicism related books, but others too, the mystics, the Catholic mystics.
So what did you perceive you were doing in meditation then, if not a form of, because when I got into meditation, if I wasn't aware of that it was an investigation of the nature of the self right there and then, pretty quickly I was, and that's the context I saw it in. But if that wasn't the case for you, why were you sitting and meditating?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I remember being taught to meditate by a nun when I was 10 or 11, in year 6 at school. And the way of meditating was kind of like we would imagine we were on a beach with Jesus and he was walking along with us holding our hand. And so for a long time my meditations were visualizations, and I would imagine meeting Jesus or Mary or sometimes meeting all sorts of other things, animals, plants. So for a long time as a child, I guess my meditation kind of took that form. And then when I was 17, I joined a convent. I thought I wanted to be a nun. So I joined a convent, and we spent many, many hours a day in meditation. And some of that would be Lectio Divina, which would be reading the Bible and then meditating. So maybe repeating a phrase from the Bible and just letting it kind of take form within the self. And then I left the convent, and then I kind of started experimenting with chanting, but there was always kind of a purpose for me, and that purpose, I guess in my mind I conceptualized it as I was looking for peace, and I thought meditation through these visualizations, through this chanting, through this sitting in stillness might bring me some peace. It was only much later I thought, gosh, this is just all about allowing whatever is. That's what meditation is. But you'd had that understanding very early on, Richard.
Yeah, it's interesting to reflect on these things, isn't it? I think questions about the nature of the self had been around for me as a teenager. Like I read Descartes' Meditations, where he tries to which is kind of a self-inquiry. So he tries to go into himself and find, what can I really know? Because this could all be a dream, and I could be being manipulated by an evil demon, right? So can I find one thing that I can be sure of? And he gives the analogy of if you have a barrel full of apples and you want them not to go rotten, you have to take out any apple that could even slightly potentially be rotten. until you've just got the ones that are definitely good left, and then you can start putting new apples in there because you've got a solid foundation. And Descartes famously cuts back to this, I think therefore I am, cogito ergo sum. And then the next thing he says after that is, what am I? I am a thinking thing. So he's formed this kind of, okay, there's a thing there, which I am, right? And it didn't occur to me at the time, and I don't know if it occurred to Descartes or not, that thinking thing goes away for about 8 hours a day when we sleep, right? And then the thinking thing changes. Like sometimes it's, you drink a cup of coffee and the thinking thing becomes sharper, or you have a pint of beer and the thinking thing becomes duller. And so it started to occur to me at some point after that this sense of me being a person shifted, according to chemical influences or according to whether I was tired or not. So, and that just seemed strange, that who I was would be dependent on these kind of factors. And I think also I turned 18 and I'm officially an adult now. So I thought at the time. And at that time, your body's just gone through this like transformation. It's just coming to an end, right? From like birth or even conception right to the point of being there. And that's 18, 19. You're kind of done for the big stuff, right? Like all I've really done since then is lose hair, right? So it's an immense kind of change, and an immense mental change as well, from having like the worldview, so finishing high school and having the worldview of an 11-year-old to the worldview of an 18-year-old in quick succession. So that messes with the sense of, well, who am I then if everything is changing, right? And then I was struck by this sense, but it feels like there's a me in here that's the same as when I was 5. It doesn't feel like I'm a different person. But everything's changed. So what is that me? And these kind of questions were coming up. And I think also just questioning also, maybe not in questions that didn't point exactly to identity, but in terms of what makes a person happy, right? Because like lived on the myth that you go through school and then get a job and earn lots of money and that makes you happy. But I was realizing, well, like if two people that stood in a field and one has lots of money and one doesn't, what difference does that make to them? They're just in the field with the grass and the sun is doing what it's doing. And so where does happiness come from, actually? And these things, they were just cutting into all my perceptions. And at the same time as that, I was having these like mystical experiences, I have to say induced by alcohol, and a kind of funny hangover the next day of feeling very connected to everything and shifting into this place in consciousness of feeling very in the moment, and just like with this real sense of peace and enjoying being in the garden and not being consumed by worries for the day. And I had no context for that then. And the thing that spoke to me then was Zen, when I found out about that, because I got into martial arts. I think there's a bit of an intuitive draw towards, I knew I was experiencing a shift in consciousness. And Zen has all this stuff in about talking about letting go our worries and being in the moment. I was in the moment. I didn't think to think of it that way, but that's what was going on there. And the idea that it was important to ask questions about the nature of the self wasn't immediate to me. It came, I got into meditation to, let's see if I can recapture this really lovely state of being. And was doing the whole meditation thing. And then in doing that one day, I really saw that there was no fixed me in my own head, right? And it's like the most blindingly obvious thing that we never look at, because we're always paying attention to something out there, or even if our attention is internal, it's to patterns of thought. It's not to who is the thinker. And that wasn't a good insight to have emotionally, right? It was upsetting, like really upsetting, because the one thing that I thought was my good apple in the barrel, and now I got to chuck that one out, and now the barrel's empty, right? And it was quite, I didn't have a context, because I've been reading books on meditation, but a lot of books on meditation don't really talk about self-inquiry, so it was then I had to read like slightly more esoteric stuff, which did, and it's like, right, I'm not like, this is not like some sort of psychosis, it's not me going mad, and I'm not the first person to experience this. There are lots of people through history who have experienced this in a very positive way. And that's like a start of a journey then, into investigation of the self. And I wouldn't say it was always like a good thing, because it's self-inquiry, I don't think promises like at every step of the way to make your life better, right? It promises to take you very deeply inside yourself, and you're going to find whatever you find there. And at times that can be like worse, because you find stuff you don't like.
Well, you
so
find an empty barrel, as you say.
Yeah, and that, ultimately, like finding emptiness, and what does emptiness feel like? So that was the start of it for me.
Yeah.
And how do you find it now? Your like experience of coming out of the kind of suffering you went through and being kind of recovered. Has your context for understanding this process of self-inquiry changed over the years, and what benefit does it bring to you now? What do you feel about it now?
I guess for me, even from that very first taste of it, it doesn't feel to have changed much. I really recognise when you say emotionally it wasn't not an easy realisation that, gosh, is there nothing, this thinker of the thoughts, this kind of personal entity that somehow appears to permeate all of my experiences. What happens when I look for that one and I find this kind of emptiness? And I guess that emptiness could equally be called aliveness, beingness, consciousness, all these different terms that people use. This sense of the emptiness and the fullness at the same time, the sense that whatever that thing is, that consciousness, that beingness, that aliveness, not even the thinker of the thoughts, but the one aware of the thinker of the thoughts. That whatever that one is, it's not graspable. And I think that's quite scary. I certainly found that quite scary. Oh, who am I then? And not only who am I, but there was this fear at the beginning of, well, what's the point? I think it can feel a bit like that on occasion for some people at the beginning. Like, what's the point then? What's the point in me continuing my studies? What's the point in me doing all of these things? Because at that moment, all of the kind of personal investment in those things feels to drop away. It's like, gosh, well, I'm this emptiness, I'm this aliveness. It doesn't matter whether I qualify as a psychologist, or if I travel to this place, or do all these other things that society says might be a good idea for me to do. But then what I've found over the years is that all of those things continue to happen, and life continues to unfold, and my body continues to do what it does. So it continues to kind of seek out experiences that feel good to it, and my brain continues to like being stimulated, so I continue to seek out education and all of these things. And yet there's not kind of this driving experience, driving entity, driving energy, I guess is what I'm trying to say, behind it, that says if I don't do these things, life isn't okay and I'm not okay.
Coming from a core place of security.
Yeah, because none of those things are who I am. They're things that arise within who I am, as is the body, are the thoughts, but they're not ultimately who I am. So therefore, it feels like life is a lot more flowy, because I can try different things and I can follow different things. But if it doesn't work out, and if life goes in a totally different direction, it feels to be really okay. With moments of panic, with moments of that conditioning coming up and saying, but you've got to do this and you've got to do that, and you're not a good person if you don't manage this. But even that is perceived and kind of seen as being, okay, these are things that are arising out of my conditioning and out of my experiences. And I think those things, they can be very embedded and they can take a while. But but there doesn't feel to be any pain in it anymore in that same way. I don't know how it is now for you, Richard.
Yeah, I think it's like become more stable over the years as a thing. I think that maybe for the first few years of going into this, it's a real kind of virgin territory, okay, and quite a discovery. And as I said, like not always every step is more happy than the last. So there was a phase where self-inquiry, whilst it definitely brought me out of about 1.5 years depressive period, it also led me into it, because I was going into the self, and okay, the ultimate nature of the self I found this kind of, I didn't find what I was reading about in terms of the love of God within or something, or this transcendent sense of peace. I found this bleak kind of sense of emptiness that I used to call like the not nothing, right, which is negation. It's like the non-dual thing, because it didn't even feel like nothingness. It's just when I look deeply inside of myself, I just find this blank absence of everything, and that felt like the very core of my being. And that whilst I might see it as a not nothing, it didn't affect my emotions in a nothing way. It made me quite depressed, because it's like everything is just empty in the end. And yeah, ultimately the process also brought me out of that. And in a similar way maybe to what you're saying about embracing this sense of monstrousness, of allowing myself to sink into that nothingness, to dissolve into it, to not have the separation between me and it, to say, okay, if this is what I am, then this is what I'll be, and surrender to it. And then it transformed into this transcendent sense of love within this infinite ocean within us. And that just instantly cured the depressive period, because that had been like the problem, and there was a solution, and that was that. It was very straightforward, as these things go. And then after that, it was, I suppose, more a sense of trying to understand, what is this consciousness that opens up when we look within, and how does it open up, and understanding better, I suppose, having in some ways a better intellectual framework for it. And I think I tend to see this like as a comparison to sleep and dreaming, that when we dream, we have all these different characters in our mind, and we play one of those characters. So I can say that, yeah, I had a dream last night and I did this and these other people did this. But of course, in reality, like where the consciousness in which the whole dream is arising, we're every character. And we can gain that perspective in dream. We can dream lucidly and become aware of ourselves as this conscious, oh, really, I'm sleep in bed at night. And that's an amazing experience in a dream, because you can, see reality in a whole different way. You can see everything that's apparently out there is really not out there. There is no space and extension and all this. And I think, yeah, to look at it through that context, and then to replicate that experience really of being able to access that transcendent state of consciousness and bring it into daily life more and more. And the more I've gone on with that, I suppose, the more stable it's come to feel, and the more integrated into life. Okay, Nicole, how are we doing? Shall we draw this one to a close and pick up some other stuff another time? Okay, well, thank you very much for the conversation, and we'll speak again soon.
Okay, thank you.